Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the SS Sultana. Starting off heavy with this list today, we have one of the worst maritime disasters in US history, and it occurred on April 27, 1865. The SS Sultana was a side-wheel steamship, and on that fateful day, it exploded on the Mississippi River just north of Memphis, Tennessee. This incident took place in a time after the Civil War had just ended, and of course, the POWs held in Confederate military prisons were eager to get back to their homes after everything they had just endured. This led to the federal government paying a hefty price to steam operators for each soldier they took with them. This then led to a whole bunch of steam operators cutting corners so that they could bank on this deal. In the case of the Sultana, this meant safety things like repairing a leaky boiler or adhering to the capacity limits were cut. At the time of the explosion, the ship was carrying as many as 2,300 people, which was over 6 times the limited capacity. Unfortunately, the neglect of the boiler led to it rupturing, which initially took the lives of hundreds of those on board. After this, the already overloaded docks were made weaker and they ended up collapsing, which left people trapped. In the end, around 1,800 people lost their lives. While I'm sure there are many Americans and others from around the world who have heard of this tragic incident by now, at the time, not many people knew about it at all. If you remembered, this happened on April 27, 1865, and President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, which ended up overshadowing this tragic event in terms of coverage. And it's not like there was a 24-hour news cycle back then where they were just constantly being bombarded with the worst of the worst. Even today, where we do have that, terrible things get overlooked and overshadowed all of the time. In our number 9 spot today, we have the MV Donna Paz. This maritime disaster took place on December 20th, 1987, when this passenger ferry collided with the oil tanker, the MT Vector. The collision took place in the Tablas Strait, which is about 180 kilometers south of Manila. This ship was carrying more than 4,000 people, which was double its capacity, and at the time of the collision, there were no senior officers on the bridge of the ship, and on the Vector, there was no lookout, and it is thought that both ships lacked a functioning radio. That's what I like to call all bad. The weather and the waters were both quite calm when the collision happened, and despite the clear visibility, neither ship gave an indication that it noticed the other. When the collision occurred, the 8,800 barrels of oil and gasoline on the Vector quickly ignited and engulfed both ships in flames. Out of the over 4,400 people that were on board both ships, only 26 people were rescued from the waters and survived. It really makes you wonder exactly what happened here, because from an outside perspective, it seems like this tragedy could have been avoided. In our number 8 spot today, we have the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. This ship was a part of the Nazi Strength Through Joy program, which was an important propaganda tool during the Third Reich. This ocean liner is said to have carried German workers who were indulging in leisurely activities on cruises throughout the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, but when World War II began, it ended up being converted into a hospital ship. Closer to the end of the war, this ship then switched gears again and was called on in order to evacuate German troops and civilians from East Prussia ahead of the advancing of the Soviet troops. At this time, the ship had shed its white paint with red crosses that symbolized it as non-combatant, and this, coupled with the clear presence of troops on board, as well as the anti-aircraft guns on board, well, it was obvious that this made it a viable military target. While it was built to accommodate around 1,900 people, on January 30th, 1945, as the ship left port, an estimated 10,000 people packed on board. Just after 9:00 p.m. that night, a Soviet submarine fired 3 torpedoes at the ship, which slammed into its side. Because of ice, many of the lifeboats were inoperable, and those who were on board that were best trained to deal with these kinds of emergencies and dire situations had either been killed in the blast or were trapped below the deck. Just over an hour later, the ship slipped underwater. Unlike a lot of the other wrecks on this list, rescue did begin just minutes after the SOS call was sent out, but still only 1,200 people were saved. With a death toll of somewhere around an estimated 9,000 people, this remains one of the deadliest shipwrecks in history. In our number 7 spot today, we have the HMS Victory. This is one of the oldest wrecks we have on this list today, and this one took place on October 5th, 1744. The HMS Victory was a 100-gun Royal Navy vessel, and on October 3rd, just a couple days before the wreck, the ship was in a fleet reaching the English Channel. A storm ended up scattering the fleet all apart from each other, and on October 4th, the ships with the Victory lost sight of her. What happened to the HMS Victory remained a mystery for over 260 years, and it wasn't until 2009 that the fate was found out. Just 50 miles off the coast of England near Plymouth, the US company Odyssey Marine Exploration ended up finding the wreckage, and and when found, the ship's cannons were still in good condition, with even the royal crests visible underwater, despite the nearly 3 centuries it had been. This was also the first time that any trace of the 1,150 sailors that were on the ship were found, as sadly no one in the entire crew survived the wreck. In our number 6 spot today, we have the SS Kiangya. On December 4th, 1948, this ship was carrying thousands of passengers who were fleeing Shanghai due to the advancing People's Liberation Army. On this day, the official number of passengers was said to be 2,150, which was already almost double its capacity rate, but it said that several thousand more people crowded onto the ship before it left the docks. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. It's weighing the risk of packing onto this boat versus staying in the situation you're currently trying to flee. As the ship got to the mouth of the Huangpu River, it is believed that it may have struck some sort of World War II era mine or something like that because it just exploded. Rescuers were also unaware of the explosion for hours, which only made the situation worse. Somewhere around 700 passengers were rescued, but this meant that a number estimated to be from 2,750 to as many as 4,000 people lost their lives in this explosion and the subsequent sinking of the ship. In our number 5 spot today, we have the RMS Empress of Ireland. The Empress of Ireland was a Canadian ocean liner that was out to sea on May 29th, 1914, when tragedy struck. The ship was traveling down the St. Lawrence River through some thick fog, which is what led to her colliding with a Norwegian collier, which is a bulky cargo ship that was designed in order to transport coal. The cargo ship didn't sink, but unfortunately the same couldn't be said for the Empress, as she listed and fast. Water began pouring in through portholes, which led to those below deck meeting their fate rapidly. The official death toll of the crash is said to have been 1,012 people, and it still remains the worst disaster in Canadian maritime history. It makes me wonder how, as a Canadian especially, I've never heard of this accident before. The wreck of this ship still lies in a fairly shallow 130 feet of water, which has made it a pretty popular diving location for those wishing to retrieve relics. In our number 4 spot today, we have the SS General Slocum. This passenger steamboat was built in Brooklyn, New York, and on June 15, 1904, it was carrying members of the St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church as they were on their way to a church picnic. They were traveling up the East River on the way to Long Island Sound when a fire started in the lamp room. Considering the fact that the lamp room was obviously filled with lamp oil, while a fire on board a ship is never good, this is one of the worst case scenarios. Actually, lamp oil, oil rags, and nearby paint locker in a cabin filled with gasoline are actually what created this worst case scenario. The safety equipment of this ship was not nearly up to standards, as it was rarely even checked, and when the crew attempted to get the fire hose in order to put out the flames, they found a rotten fire hose that crumbled in their hands. The life jackets being given out to people began to fall apart, and they couldn't even access the lifeboats at all. I cannot even imagine the panic people were feeling at this point. Many of the passengers saw no other option and jumped into the water to try and swim, but like many Americans at the time, they didn't know how, and the heavy wool clothes they wore only worked to weigh them down. At the end of the day, it is said that around 1,021 people lost their lives in this absolutely tragic event. In our number 3 spot today, we have the MV La Julia. This was a ship that was owned by the Senegalese government, and despite the fact that it was designed to carry a maximum of 580 passengers, on September 26, 2002, the ship had at least 2,000 people on board. This is obviously a huge issue, and this, coupled with the fact that there was a large amount of people who were sleeping on the ship's deck, which is of course above the center of buoyancy, only made matters worse. The ship was en route to the Senegalese capital of Dakar, and as it sailed farther out to sea than it was licensed to sail, it ended up encountering a storm and really rough waters. The ship ended up capsizing, and out of the 2,000 people on board, only 64 people survived the entire ordeal. Not only was this because of the fact that the ship sank exceptionally quickly, but it's mostly because rescue was not sent out until several hours after. The wreck is thought to be one of the worst non-military disasters in all of maritime history. Despite the severity of the situation, no one has been charged or prosecuted for the disaster to this day. In our number 2 spot today, we have the MS Al Salam Boccaccio 98. This is a shipwreck that took place on the Red Sea on February 3rd, 2006. At the time of the wreck, the ship was en route from Dubai, UAE, on the way to Safaga in southern Egypt. When the ship left port, it was already listing due to poor weather, and things only got worse from here. A fire broke out in the engine room, and it continued to burn despite the crew's best efforts to get it put out. The crew used buckets and buckets of seawater, and at one point the fire was temporarily put out, but it reignited before long. At this point, the captain tried to turn around and return to the port, but the drainage pumps weren't working properly, which meant that the hull of the ship had now filled up with water. When they tried to turn, it just resulted in the balance being all thrown off and the ship capsized. Like I mentioned before, when they set out, the weather was already bad, which of course made the rescue efforts substantially more difficult because those people also had to try and sail through this bad weather and strong winds. This left dozens out floating in the Red Sea. Sadly, it is reported that somewhere around 1,018 people lost their lives in this wreck. In our number 1 spot today, we have the MV Goya. This ship was built in Norway in 1940 and was meant to be a freighter, but in a World War II world, this ship ended up being used as a passenger ship in order to evacuate citizens as a part of Operation Hannibal. This, of course, as anyone could reasonably imagine, meant that the ship was very often overcrowded as they were trying to rescue as many people as possible at a time. On April 16, 1945, the ship was carrying over 7,000 passengers, which is 5 times the amount of people it could safely carry, when it was hit by a torpedo that was sent from a Soviet submarine just before midnight. The force of the explosion was so great that the ship only took minutes to sink, and since the timing of the incident had most passengers in their beds, you can imagine the outcome. Because of a lack of proper record keeping in with the absolute panic of trying to rescue people with the imminent threat of attack, it isn't quite clear exactly how many people lost their lives in this wreck, but it's thought that somewhere between 6,000 to 7,000 passed away, which is unbelievable. It is thought that there were around 180 survivors of the wreck, and due to the unbelievable tragedy, the location of it has now been officially declared a war grave by the Polish authorities.
Starting our list off at number 10, Roman shipwreck. Right off the coast of Palermo, Sicily, archaeologists have discovered not only an ancient Roman shipwreck, but jars mainly used for transporting wine and olive oil. We found a long-lost grocery run, it seems. The 2nd century vessel sits in the Mediterranean Sea at around 302 feet deep. Now, it's a shock that this thing was ever found. It's not an extremely large vessel, and again, it's quite old. Wine trade was the bread and butter of the Roman Republic, specifically the wine known as Mamertino, which was Julius Caesar's favorite. He loved that one. That was an excellent one. So this discovery really is a 2-for-1, all just lying at the bottom of the sea. Number 9, Lake Ontario. Back in July 2011, a Canadian schooner believed to be around 160 years old was found off the shores of Lake Ontario. So we ask, what went wrong? Did it hit something? Was it abandoned? What happened here? Well, when it was found, the ship was carrying around 480 tons of coal. Now, normally that's manageable, but this fateful voyage was caused by a leak that developed on both sides of the ship. That plus the coal equals bad news. The water was coming in too quick, and with the help of the 480 tons of coal, it was unstoppable. The original search for this ship began in 2009, but it took 2 years to find. Number 8, Norfolk Royal Shipwreck. Okay, so this initial discovery happened back in 2007, but it was a secret until quite recently. On May 6th in 1682, a ship called the Gloucester got stuck on a sandbank off the coast of Norfolk. Then an hour later, she sank, sadly. Now, one of these passengers was the future King James II of England. He escaped in a small boat, a quick decision that changed the course of history nonetheless. But 2 diving brothers found the ship back in 2007, so now history has literally resurfaced. And now we can talk about it. Only months ago, it was announced officially that this was that lost ship. Maritime expert Claire Jowett calls this recent discovery the single most significant historic maritime discovery since the raising of the Mary Rose, which was King Henry VIII's favorite warship back in 1982. So number 7, the MV Joyita. The case of the MV Joyita began in 1955, and when we think of shipwrecks from the 2nd century, that's, quite recent in comparison. The MV Joyita, this case is baffling, and dare I say, it's a little paranormal. A lot of unanswered questions out there. November 10th, 1955, Captain Gerald Douglas was sailing his merchant ship from Suva, Fiji to Funatuti, which was the capital of Tavula in the South Pacific Ocean. Now that's when he noticed the MV Joyita. It was tipped over, sitting there, not fully sank, but the port side rails were dipping in and out of the water. A search and rescue team went out for 6 days straight to find any survivors. From the 6th to the 12th, they searched, and after searching for hundreds of miles in the Pacific, they found nothing. They found no survivors, no clues, nothing. There's a book that tries to solve the mystery called The Mary Celeste of the South Pacific, but what do you think? If you have any theories on the MV Joyita yourself, sound off below. Number 6, the Great Lakes Griffin. Back in 2018 in Lake Michigan, again, another Canadian discovery, diver Steve Liebert found what he believed was the holy grail of Great Lake shipwrecks. The Griffin sank back in 1679. Divers have been searching for this exact ship for years and years. Now, as a kid, Steve Liebert was talking about the shipwreck when his history teacher stopped and says, "Oh, who knows, maybe one of you will find that Griffin." Imagine that. Imagine your grade 8 teacher telling you that somebody will find a ship and that somebody was actually you. Yeah, at 67 years old, Steve Liebert found the wreck. It was 2018, but his research began 40 years prior, so it was a long time coming. Liebert began diving in 1981. It took a long time to track down this long long lost ship, but he did it somehow. This is like National Treasure 3. Let's do this instead. If you're in any Great Lakes, again, keep your eyes open for 50-foot long ships from the late 1600s. Those might be lurking below your feet. Those and sunfish. They're all down there waiting for you. Number 5. The deepest shipwreck. Who knows how many shipwrecks lay in our oceans, right? Considering how many of them have yet to be found, and the ocean's way too big. It's so big, so unfathomably big. The USS Johnston, led by Captain Ernest Evans, was a US Navy destroyer which sank during the Battle of Leyte in 1944 after a standoff with a large fleet of Japanese warships. The destroyed ship laid at the bottom of the ocean around 20,000 feet deep, just hiding in pure darkness until it was discovered in the Philippine Sea in 2019, only a few years ago. Diving crews had been unable to reach it for an up-close look, of course, because it was so deep, and to put an idea of how far down this thing was, well, it was 60% deeper than the Titanic. So, as fascinating as it is to find something, now it's still a challenge getting down there to actually see it. I can't even touch the bottom of an in-ground pool without my ears exploding, so I can't even imagine. That's so terrifying. Number 4, HMS Victory. This is one of the oldest wrecks that we have on this list today, and it took place on October 5th, 1744. It's a long time ago. The HMS Victory was a 100-weapon Royal Navy vessel, and on October 3rd, just a couple days before the wreck, the ship was in a fleet reaching the English Channel. A storm ended up scattering said fleet all apart from each other on October 4th, and the ships within the Victory lost sight of her. What happened to the HMS Victory remained a mystery for over 260 years. It wasn't until 2009 that the ship's fate was finally realized. Just 50 miles off the coast of England, near Plymouth, the US company Odyssey Marine Exploration, they ended up finding the wreckage, and when found, the ship's cannons were all still in pristine condition, with even their royal crests still visible underwater, despite, being under there for nearly 3 centuries, hiding in the depths. This was also the first time that any trace of the 1,150 sailors that were on the ship was found, right? This whole time it's been a mystery where they went, what happened to them, all that. This answers a handful of those dark questions. This ship is also a reminder of how the cannons were once made. They were made fully of bronze. Number 3, MV Donna Paz. This maritime disaster took place on December 20th, 1987, when this passenger ferry collided with the oil tanker, the MT Vector. Yeah, it was horrible. The collision took place in the Tabla Strait, which is about 180 kilometers south of Manila. This ship was carrying more than 4,000 people, which was actually double its capacity at the time of the collision. There were no senior officers on the bridge of the ship as well on the Vector, and there was no lookout. And it's thought that both ships lacked a functioning radio, so it's quite possibly the worst conditions imaginable. The weather and waters were both quite calm when the collision actually happened, and despite the clear visibility, neither ship gave an indication that it noticed the other one. So when the collision actually occurred, the 8,800 barrels of oil and gasoline on the Vector quickly ignited and engulfed both ships in flames. Only 26 people survived out of the, again, over 4,000 souls on board that day. Number 2, MV Lijula. This was once a ship that was owned by the Senegalese government, and despite the fact that it was designed to carry a maximum of 580 passengers, on September 26, 2002, this ship had at least 2,000 people on board. Again, when it could only have 580. So we're starting to see where we're going wrong here. This is obviously a huge red flag, and it's coupled with the fact that there was a large amount of people who were sleeping on the ship's deck, which is of course above the center of buoyancy. These combined only made matters worse, and the inevitable happened. The ship was en route to the Senegalese capital of Dakar, and it sailed further out to sea than it was licensed to sail. It ended up encountering a storm at that point, and then terribly rough waters. The ship ended up capsizing, and out of the 2,000 on board, only 64 people survived the entire ordeal. Not only was this because of the fact that the ship sank exceptionally quickly, but it's mostly because rescue was not sent until several hours after the entire thing took place. And finally, number 1, Ernest Shackleton. He braved the harsh conditions in the South Pole, and by 1914, Ernest Shackleton was ready to do it again. He set out with a group of 28 men, and they all had the intention to make it all the way across the continent and then arrive at a ship that should be waiting for them on the other side. Well, things took a bad turn almost immediately. See, as they were on their journey to Antarctica, they all became trapped in the ice as their ship, the Endurance, started falling apart. Now from here, as they were trapped, their supplies slowly began to dwindle, and this led to men getting aboard life rafts to then float for 14 days through the icy Antarctic seas to an island. Now unfortunately, once here, this wasn't the end, as the men then had to take another long journey all the way to the nearest inhabited island, which was South Georgia Island, which was 1,000 miles away. It was horrible. It was quite a journey. Now despite everything these men went through on this horrible, rough journey, all 28 of them survived this entire ordeal. And 107 years after its sinking, on March 9th, 2022, the Endurance, Ernest Shackleton's ship, was found in pristine condition. Yeah, it was found 10,000 feet below the icy Antarctic waters that it sank in, and the frigid temperatures mixed with the lack of sunlight, well, it's been sitting like Captain America. It's just sitting in time, just waiting. It looks like it's been untouched. It's actually really haunting to look at.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have this lost dialysis machine. In 2012, a woman was checking in for her cruise that was off to Jamaica. God, how much would I love to be going on that cruise right now. As she's going through this process, however, she was informed by the cruise line that they were unable to find her portable dialysis machine. This, of course, is a huge problem as this person needed nightly dialysis, and I can't imagine a machine like that would come cheap. To make matters worse, she was then escorted off of the ship without any kind of explanation, and the ship sailed off. She wasn't on the ship, but all of her luggage was, and also most likely the machine that had been misplaced. The cruise line, of course, ended up refunding her ticket, and they also gave her credit for a future cruise, but I'm not exactly sure if she would want to give that company another shot or not. I'm not exactly sure how long it took for her to get her luggage back, or if she was ever able to recover that machine. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Viking Sky Cruise ship. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. In March of 2019, the Viking Sky Cruise ship was off the coast of Norway when the weather got very stormy and the waters began to get really rough, so the ship was actually stranded. The boat was carrying 1,300 people and the passengers began getting airlifted off of the ship, but some had to wait for over 24 hours in order to be able to be rescued. Of course, air was the only way for them to get help because of the conditions of the water. It wasn't safe for any boat to be traveling through. One passenger told the news that the waves were so bad at one point they actually broke a door and passengers were getting thrown around the room. Once the conditions improved, the captain was able to get the ship to a dock where everyone was able to get to safety. There were videos taken by passengers that showed water actually inside the ship, which must have been so scary. People also said that the waves were up to 30 feet high, which I just can't even imagine. I am so glad that everyone was okay after this undoubtedly scary day. In our number 8 spot today, we have the MSC Opera. In June of 2019, the MSC Opera was in Venice, Italy, when it actually crashed into another small boat called the River Countess. Apparently something happened and the engines had got stuck, which is what apparently caused the accident. This, of course, could have been pretty catastrophic, as an accident like this could not only cause a ton of damages, but also could have been extremely fateful. But in a very fortunate turn of events, everyone walked away from the incident. The opera boat had some scratches that needed to be fixed, of course, as well as the malfunctioning engine. The River Countess was a little bit more banged up in the accident, but nothing too crazy. And only 5 people were injured in this accident, and it is said that none of them were serious, which is just the best news. In our number 7 spot today, we have Carnival Cruise Line's Triumph. Carnival Cruise Line's Triumph, which is now called Sunrise, was dubbed as the Poop Cruise, and for a very good and disgusting reason. There was a generator fire on board the ship, which caused a whole world of trouble. The fire left the entire ship without power, which unfortunately meant no working bathrooms. Passengers were asked to do their business in hazardous waste bags and to throw them into the garbages on deck. But of course, this is only a temporary solution that truly isn't ideal, and one that would not last long. Considering the fact that it took the ship 4 whole days to be towed back from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Alabama, you can only imagine how awful those days must have been. Passengers have described there being more than 2 inches of sewage covering the ground, which I think may have turned me off from cruises forever. 31 passengers later sued for the long-lasting damages, some of them citing PTSD. 27 of these people received $118,000 for them to split, which I don't think was worth all of the fuss of them even suing in the first place. In our number 6 spot today, we have Royal Caribbean's Explorer of the Seas. In 2014, Royal Caribbean's Explorer of the Seas was traveling from New Jersey to the Caribbean when it experienced some troubled waters. I don't mean that literally as in the water, I'm talking more about what happened on board. Cruise ships are known to be a place where viruses spread like wildfire, but this was one of the worst cases we have ever seen. The ship at one point was carrying more sick people than any other boat had ever been carrying since the Center for Disease Control and Prevention began keeping track more than 20 years ago. That most definitely is not a record one would want to hold. At one point, there were apparently 700 passengers who were sick at the same time. Apparently, most of the illnesses contracted on a cruise ship are the result of a norovirus that causes inflammation in the stomach and large intestines. I am just really glad that this terrible outbreak was not coupled with the power outage that the Triumph boat that we talked about before experienced, because that would have been tragic. In our number 5 spot today, we have Carnival Cruise Line's Splendor. Carnival Cruise Line's Splendor had a similar issue to Triumph's. In November of 2010, the ship was stranded in the Pacific Ocean after engine fires caused the ship to lose power. There were 4,500 passengers on board at the time, so this situation was dire. The ship ended up being towed by tugboat back to San Diego, but the passengers were left without power for air conditioning or refrigeration the whole time. The US Navy actually had to airlift in rations for passengers so that they would have something to eat. Luckily, the boat arrived back safely and no passengers were injured. All of the passengers received refunds for their tickets and travel, and they also received vouchers that could be redeemed for a future cruise with the company. In our number 4 spot today, we have the MTS Oceanos. The MTS Oceanos was built by a French company and set out in 1952, but it ended up being purchased by a Greek company in 1976. In 1991, the ship set out for South Africa, led by Captain Yanis Avranas. Because I don't speak sailing, this means nothing to me, but for those of you who understand, the ship was headed into 40-knot winds and 30-foot swells. I assume this is not ideal, as the usual outdoor parties were transferred inside for the time being. The weather conditions ended up worsening that night, and the ship was really rolling from side to side, which is not a good sign. Because of the lack of repairs on the waste disposal system, there ended up being an explosion that led to the ship losing power, and water began filling the generator room, which is never a good sign. Since the generators were down, the ship was simply just adrift, which is truly a nightmare. Of course, a distress call was sent and a bunch of helicopters from South Africa came to the rescue. In a strange and surprising turn of events, the captain and a lot of crew members were the first to be saved from the ship, which left the entertainment staff, who do not get paid enough, to coordinate all of the passengers and the rescue efforts. All 571 people who were on board the ship ended up being rescued, which is the happy ending that we all needed, and the ship ended up sinking nose first into the sea. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Seabourn Spirits. In 2005, the Seabourn Spirits, which is a small cruise ship, was about 100 miles from the coast of Somalia when pirates in speedboats came up and began attacking. The pirates had machine guns they were firing, as well as rocket-propelled grenades, which is insane. The captain was obviously a very quick thinker, as he managed to change the course of the ship and actually was able to get away, which is just so amazing. There were 300 passengers on board, and miraculously, none of them got hurt, which is just the best news. The ship ended up making it all of the way to Seychelles, where everyone could be safe and the damage that the boat had taken could be repaired. I can't imagine how scary this must have been and how stressed that captain would have been, but I am very glad this ended off on a positive note. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Norwegian Dawn. In April of 2005, the Norwegian Dawn was sailing through some extremely rough weather off of the coast of Georgia. The ship was encountering waves that went as high as 70 feet. The third extremely large wave that came crashing down on the boat ended up smashing several windows on the ship, which resulted in the flooding of at least 62 cabins. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that could be done until the storm had passed, but of course, most of the passengers chose to get off the boat as early as they could once it became possible. There were only 4 passengers who ended up being injured, none of which were severe. The damage to the boat wasn't extremely extensive, so they were able to repair it, which is great news. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Costa Concordia. The Costa Concordia was a huge ship with 17 decks, 6 restaurants, and a 3-story theater. The ship was big enough to hold a whopping 4,200 passengers, so there were a lot of people on this boat on January 13th, 2012. On that day, the boat's captain wanted to sail a little closer to the island of Isola del Giglio than he normally would, so that he could impress and salute the residents. He turned off the ship's alarm for the computer navigation system, which turned out to be just as terrible of an idea as you would think it is. He thought he knew the waters well enough to navigate by sight, But when the ship struck an underwater rock, things took a deadly turn. The ship capsized and sank, which unfortunately ended up taking the lives of some of the passengers on board. The captain, who was responsible for the accident in the first place, made one more awful mistake when he abandoned ship while passengers were still stuck on board. Every captain knows that this is a huge faux pas. The recovery for this ship was the largest of its kind, as the huge ship had been entirely dismantled. The captain ended up being sentenced to jail for manslaughter. He of course appealed this decision multiple times, but in 2017 he began serving his 16-year sentence.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have the mystery of the mannequin boat. Following the Category 5 Hurricane Irma in 2017, a ghost ship washed ashore on Melbourne Beach in Florida. Mysteriously, the ship was intact, surviving the intense storm. Named Cookie, the 45-foot sailboat seemed to have traveled hundreds of miles before being washed up on the beach. No living soul was found on board, but 2 mannequins were found below deck, having survived the ordeal unscathed. What they were doing on the ship and what happened to the captain, sadly, we just don't know. Coming into number 9, we have the anonymous Jiang Seng. In March 2006, a slightly rusty ghost tanker ship was found off the coast of Queensland in Australia. She had a broken tow rope, which suggests that she was being towed by another boat and at some point broke loose. There was nobody on board when the Jiang Seng was discovered, but no signs of damage or piracy were visible. At first, sea officers thought the boat had simply got loose and were waiting for someone to claim it. When nobody did, they ran extensive searches of registered ships, but the boat had never been registered. When they checked the ship's engine, it was inoperable. Other than being identified as Jiang Seng, nobody knows where the boat came from. An Australian Customs Service spokesman said, "It really is a bit of a mystery, I'll say." Coming into number 8, we have the mystery of High Aim 6. On January the 8th, 2003, a Taiwanese vessel, the High Aim 6, was found drifting in Australian waters. More in Australia, what is going on? When the ship was broached, there were no souls aboard, yet weirdly, there were no signs of distress. The boat was tugged to shore in Broome, Western Australia, where a forensic investigation took place. However, no signs of the crew were discovered. All that was discovered were 7 toothbrushes and a cargo full of rotting fish. The boat's owner was contacted and he said he last spoke with the captain in December of 2002. One crew member, an Indonesian man, was later tracked down. Now, he didn't provide many details on his survival, but he did say that both the captain, Chen Tae Cheng, and the ship's engineer, Lin Chung Lee, had been. My goodness. Perhaps there was a mutiny on board, or there was a hidden motive, but nobody has ever been able to fully explain it. Australian smuggling specialist Craig Kennedy said, "I've been working with boats all my life and I've never seen anything like this. It's a bloody mystery." Sadly for the boat, it was later sunk off the coast of Broome. Coming into number 7, we have the SV Resolven. The Resolven was a Welsh merchant brig that was found abandoned between islands in Newfoundland by crew of the nearby HMS Mallard. Now this all went down in August 1884. The drifting ship was in a fine condition, and initially the Mallard signaled to see if the crew were okay. When they didn't get a response, they boarded the ship to find the gallery fire was lit and food had been laid out on the tables. The only thing was, there was no one to eat it. The ship had been completely abandoned. The ship's lifeboat was gone, as was the captain's stash of gold, leading some people to think that, you know what, maybe it was a mutiny. The most agreed narrative is that the crew mutinied, however that doesn't explain why the stove was lit and food was laid out and never eaten. It seemed like people jumped off the ship in an absolute hurry. Now the 7 crew and 4 passengers were never found, nor was any trace of the missing lifeboat. The Resolven case lay unresolved to this day. Coming in at number 6, we have the SV Carol A. Deering. After passing Cape Lookout in North Carolina in January 1921, the 5-mast cargo boat became wrecked, and basically it was run aground in mysterious circumstances. Her crew and her logbook were missing, nowhere to be found. The mystery of the boat's final voyage is one of the most discussed and written about maritime mysteries of all time. Weirdly, when the North Carolina Cape Lookout lightship spotted the boat a few days before she was found abandoned, the captain reported a thin man with reddish hair and a foreign accent acting strangely. He also noted a number of oddly placed crew members. What happened to these people over the next few days remains a mystery. It is suspected that the ship may have been a victim of mutiny, as it had been reported that the crew didn't very well like the captain, with one worker previously arrested for threatening to get him. Others claim that she was a victim of the Bermuda Triangle. 5 US departments of government ran investigations, as the Carol Deering was one of a number of ships to be wrecked or missing in a short period of time. No information was discovered to explain the wreck and the missing crew. It's still unresolved. We have a nice little urban legend for you to pepper the middle of this list. We have the ghostly galleon of Chapel Cove coming into number 5. I am a sucker for a good ghost story, especially when it involves pirates and treasure. In 1895, an abandoned ship dubbed the Ghost Galleon was reported off the coast of Chapel Cove in Newfoundland, a place I've categorically always wanted to visit. Now, this Spanish galleon was said to have been blown off course in the early 1700s and taken over by pirates. The pirates were said to have dispensed with the crew and took the treasure the Spanish ship was hoarding for themselves. Now, according to legend, they buried some of it in Chapel Cove. Now, newfies watching, don't be tempted to go and look for it. It is said that those who go in search of the gold will see a vision of the ghostly galleon and be visited by its dead pirates who aim to kill. Yikes. Coming into number 4, we have the SS Valencia. In January 1906, the SS Valencia was found wrecked off Vancouver Island in BC, Canada. The ship was struck. It had hit a reef in bad weather. Reversed, the crew noticed a large gash in the hull, so they ordered her to run aground to prevent her from sinking. She was stranded on rocks in horrible weather and separated from the shore by 50 meters of choppy water. 6 out of 7 lifeboats were immediately deployed against the captain's orders. 3 flipped while they were being lowered, 2 capsized when they were in the water, and 1 disappeared altogether. 2 groups of survivors made it off the boat, 1 in the final lifeboat and 1 by facing the tides and swimming. Of the 56 crew and 108 passengers, 136 people died as rescue teams struggled to get to the wreck. The survivors' awful tales of the ship floundering have marked history. Strangely, as the ship slowly sank, crew of the rescue ship, the city of Topeka, reported seeing the shape of the Valencia in the black exhaust. Reports of 8 skeletons dead in a lifeboat stuck in a cave emerged. Some people even say they saw lifeboats being manned by skeletons rowing in the water. A phantom ship was later spotted by sailors sometime after the sinking. Some even reported human figures holding onto the ship's rigging. Even weirdly, 27 years after the disaster, one of the lifeboats from the Valencia was found adrift in good condition. What happened to it over the past 3 decades, nobody knows. Coming in at number 3, we have the mystery of the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste is one of the most discussed abandoned ships of all time and a key player in maritime folklore. The real-life story goes that in November 1872, the merchant ship set sail from New York. A month later, the boat was found near the Azores Islands, completely abandoned but in a seaworthy condition. Now, this seemed to rule out bad weather playing a role in the mystery. The ship was filled with a cargo of alcohol and had food and water supplies for 6 months. Again, this seemed to rule out pirates. Inside the boat, there were no signs of struggle or a fray. The ship's lifeboat was missing and the crew were never seen again. Now, this included the revered Captain Briggs and his family. Mutiny was considered as a possibility, but seemed unlikely given the ship's condition. Other theories included foul play by a giant squid and the Bermuda Triangle, or a curse of a paranormal going on, ghosts. The case of the Mary Celeste was so intriguing at the time that it has been frequently mentioned in literature and pop culture. Coming into number 2, we have the Sao. In February 2016, the private yacht of Manfred Fritz Badgerat was found floating adrift in the Philippines. Sadly, the vessel's captain and owner, Mr. Badgerat, was found slumped dead at his desk in the boat. But this is where things get very strange indeed. Badgerat's body was found mummified. Now, people presumed this mummification happened as a result of sea conditions, basically dry and salty air and hot temperatures, which is creepy but explainable. This kind of coincided with the rumor that the German national had been missing since 2009. In the cabin, a letter to his wife who died in 2010 was found, which added to the mystery. Now, his mummified body was found near the boat's telephone system, suggesting that he was perhaps trying to make a final desperate mayday call cool. The plot thickens still when coroners who performed his autopsy said that he'd only been dead for little over a week. How can we explain his lengthy absence and the fact that his body was mummified? There is almost no way that that could have happened in a week. Now, there are photographs of the state that his body was found in, but we can't show you them in this video. If you want to see them, you can Google them, but I have to warn you, it's not very pretty. Finally, coming into number 1, now this kind of shakes me to my very core, we have the North Korean death boats. Each year it seems that scores of derelict ghost boats wash ashore in Japan. A number of these are thought to be as a result of poor equipment, leading to North Korean fishermen getting lost at sea and succumbing to the elements. The rest are usually the broken boats of deflectors who died in their attempts to flee the dictator-led nation. However, since 2015, more and more ghost ships with gruesome cargo began washing up in Japan. The grisly flotilla of 50 or so ships have washed up in the past few years, containing dozens upon dozens of bodies in varying states of decomposition. Some even arrived skeletal, suggesting they'd been dead at sea for a good number of years. On one occasion, the corpses were even headless, further adding to the mystery. The boat's markings and the clothing of those on board identified the vessels as coming from North Korea. Why they're dead, and even more frighteningly, why some of them were mutilated, we simply don't know.
Starting us off with number 10 is the SS Urang Medan. Now this one's a good one. So back in 1947, a cargo ship near the coast of Indonesia sent out a distress call with the words, "All officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." But before help even arrived, a second message was sent in with 2 words, "I die," which is spooky as hell. I wouldn't even know how to help if I was on the receiving end of that, so I don't even know what the person did. When the rescue workers finally boarded the ship, they found all crew members dead with their arms outstretched and their bodies contorted as if they froze fighting something off. But there was no sign of cause of death. None of the bodies had any trauma or injuries on them, they were just plain dead. While the rescue workers were aboard, the engine room caught fire, so they had to abandon the ship and let it sink, along with the possibility of an autopsy investigation. However, even that version of the story was debated because a year later, a newspaper article came out stating a survivor said the crew died because the cargo, which was sulfuric acid, had leaked. What makes this even shadier is that the SS Urang Medan couldn't even be found in any registry. So did this even happen at all? Or was it just pure fabrication? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And coming in at number 9 is the Lady Lover Bond. I feel like this one could be the premise of a Spanish medieval telenovela. It's a mixture of hate, jealousy, rage, and most importantly, love. In 1748, the day before Valentine's Day, naturally, a captain set a sail to celebrate his wedding. His friend was also aboard the ship to celebrate, but he was far from enjoying. He too was in love with the captain's wife, and out of hatred, he steered the ship into the Goodwin Sands and thus sinking the ship and everyone aboard. Ever since the incident, the ship is seen every 50 years sailing near the Kent area. It's been seen in 1798, 1848, 1898, and 1948, and a lot of boats even sent out rescuers thinking it was a real ship, but they just couldn't find the ship the closer they got to it. Now this is an interesting story, but the only thing that makes me skeptical is how did it sink if it just hit a sandbank? I mean, how can a sandbank damage a ship that much? Would it not just be stuck on top of the sand? Could the crew not just exit the ship and get on the sand? There's just some loose ends that don't add up for me here, but I'm also no nautical expert, so all my questions could easily be answered and just be nonsense, and I'm a bit clueless in that aspect, so there's that. At number 8 we have the High Aim number 6. The irony. Aim high they did, but succeed they did not. This fishing boat left Taiwan on Halloween Day 2002, so this is the most recent legend we've had so far, but it's also quite messed up. The boat was found a whopping 3 months after its departure by the Australian Navy. When they found it, the engine was on full throttle even though the main gas tank was empty. The auxiliary tanks were full but untouched. They found at least 10 tons of bonito tuna kept cold but no crew members. Eventually one crew member was found months later and he was arrested after confessing that the crew had worked with pirates and the ship's captain and main engineer, but he never said why they did what they did. And it's not like they ran off with the loot, which in this case were the 10 tons of tuna, so the motive is still a mystery. Filling our number 7 slot is the Mary Celeste. I feel like people have such official names for their boats and ships, so I would just name mine something short and sweet like the Oyster or the Pearl. Is that lame? I feel like that's lame. Anyway, on the morning of the 7th of November 1872, Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, as well as a 7-member crew set out on a journey from New York to Italy on the Mary Celeste. The journey was meant to take 1 month, but the ship never reached its destination. A British ship called the Del Gracia saw the Mary Celeste drifting in the Atlantic near Portugal, so the crew decided to investigate. 6 months worth of food was found as well as all the crew's belongings, but the lifeboat had been used and deployed. The floorboards were under 3 feet of water, but the state of the ship was fine, it wasn't flooded, and it definitely wasn't beyond repair. And the captain of the Del Gracia actually knew Captain Briggs and knew he was a very capable sailor, so the scene just made no sense to him. It went on to become one of the world's most famous ghost ship stories, to the point Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used it as inspiration for his story J. Habakkuk Jefferson's Statement. Till this day, no one knows what happened to everybody aboard. It's speculated that they abandoned the ship thinking the damage was worse than it was, but then didn't survive after they left. Now at number 6 are the ghost boats. Now back in 2015, Japanese authorities had found an array of ghost boats near their coastline. In the last 3 months of the year, they found 12 wooden boats all carrying the decaying bodies of 22 people. A lot of them were partially skeletonized, 2 had no heads, and 1 boat just carried 6 skulls. While trying to guess and figure out where all these ghost boats and bodies were coming from, they theorized that they must be coming from North Korea. One of the ships said Korean People's Army on it, and another one had a tattered bit of cloth on it, probably from their national flag. So they think maybe either they were just fishing vessels that strayed off course, or they were filled with defectors trying to escape. Coming in at number 5 is the Joita. Now back in 1955, a fishing and charter boat was lost at sea, missing its intended destination by 5 weeks. The air search mission couldn't find the boat anywhere, but a merchant ship managed to find it drifting 600 miles away from its origin with no crew or cargo aboard. All they found was a doctor's bag and a ton of bloody bandages with the radio tuned into the universal distress signal. Other than those clues they left behind, no one knows what happened, and the crew was never seen again. I really want to know who was injured and what ended up happening. I feel like if they all died, the guy with the bandages was the first person to go. I'm sorry, let's face it. At number 4 is the Saho. Now Saho wasn't a ship, it was just a yacht belonging to a German sailor called Manfred Fritz Badgerat, who had been sailing around the world for over 20 years. So, you know, he had a bit of experience. In early 2016, however, 2 fishermen found the yacht floating near the coast of the Philippines. It was in really poor condition when it was found, and the mainsail was broken and most of the cabin was underwater. Aboard the ship, they found Manfred's mummified, sitting at a desk in the radio room, slumped over his right arm. Autopsy reports show he had only been 7 or 8 days, but the hot temperatures, salty sea air, and ocean winds caused his body to mummify rapidly. He was last seen back in 2009, but a friend did say she had heard from him on his birthday in 2015. It's believed he died from a heart attack, and the mast on his yacht broke after that, since as an experienced sailor, he wouldn't have gone into a storm while he was still alive. Imagine no one had seen the yacht, it would have still been floating around somewhere in the world, and his daughter would have no idea what happened to her father. The sea is such a vast and unpredictable place, my mind would just run wild if that was me. Filling our number 3 slot is the Kaleuche. This one is a legend hailing from Chilota mythology. The ghost ship can be seen near the island of Chiloe every night. The ship itself is said to be a conscious and sentient being, despite it carrying the spirits of all the people who the ship is meant to be stunning, bright, and always filled with party music and laughter if you do ever manage to get a glimpse of it. But that in and of itself is near impossible, since it can only be seen for a few moments before immediately disappearing or submerging itself underwater and continuing its journey. The ship is run by a crew of drowned spirits who are brought to the ship by 2 Chilote mythological figures, Sirena Chilota, which are 2 mermaid sisters, and Pincoya, their brother. Once they're aboard the ship, they can just continue living just conscious as they were before, which honestly seems like a pretty good afterlife deal. On the other hand, other stories about the ship say it draws in sailors with its hypnotizing music and then enslaves them to be part of its crew forever. And all these hypnotized sailors have one leg folded over their back, which I don't really want to imagine how that's done. And those aren't even the only stories about the ship. There are many more, but these two are just my favorites. Now at number 2 is the Carol A. Deering. In August of 1920, the schooner, aboard with 10 crewmen, set sail from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal. The original captain of the ship got sick a few days before the departure, so he was quickly replaced and off the ship went, and they reached their destination safely. The lightship keeper said he saw the ship on its way home and was hailed by an unidentifiable crewman who claimed the ship had lost its anchors. The keeper tried to report it, but his radio wasn't working, so he couldn't. But what struck him the most was that the crew seemed to be milling around suspiciously for no reason. The next day, another ship saw the Deering near Outer Banks, which was weird because that would have just been a strange course for them to take if the ship was on its way to Virginia. A day later, it was found aground and on the Diamond Shoals. Its sails were still set, but all the lifeboats were missing. Due to the bad weather, it took surf boats 5 days to reach the ship, and as expected, it was completely abandoned. All the crew's personal belongings were gone, papers, the anchors, even key navigational equipment, all gone. Despite an extensive search, no logs were found either. The most viable explanation people have come up with is that a mutiny must have occurred due to the crew's apparent dissatisfaction with the new captain, who already had a pretty uneasy relationship with the crew. Is that just not really dramatic? I feel like they were on their way home. They didn't have to endure him for much longer. Did they really have to go through all the trouble of crashing the ship and then deserting it? I feel like waiting it out would have just been easier and a lot less energy would have been spent on it, but honestly, to each their own. If you want to sink the ship, go ahead. And finally, at number 1 is the Flying Dutchman. I think this is the most well-known ghost ship urban legend around. I didn't know any of the ones on this list before, but the Flying Dutchman I've heard of from The Simpsons, as well as of course Pirates of the Caribbean. And the legends surrounding the ship are plentiful since it has been around for a while. Most people have seen it around the Cape of Good Hope during terrible weather conditions. The ship always looks like it's caught in the storm and on the verge of crashing into the rocks before just disappearing completely. For ships that happen to see it while at sea, it's called the harbinger of death and destruction. The story goes that Captain Verder Decken wanted to establish a settlement near the Cape of Good Hope for a break from the rough weather they were experiencing. When the ship rounded the cape, a horrible storm commenced and the ship was in danger of capsizing. But even still, against the wishes of his crew, the captain forced them to go ahead even if it meant they'd sail until doomsday. Another story claims a fight ensued between the captain and the rebel group amongst the crew who wanted to turn back. That eventually led to the rebel leader being murdered, and as his body hit the water, the ship itself spoke to the captain about him deciding to go on, and the captain again said he'll try to reach it till the day of judgment. Regardless of which story you believe, his last words in both are the reason behind why the vessel is cursed to roam the seas forever, ghostly crew of dead men aboard without ever making ground in any port.
At number 10, we have the Flying Dutchman. Yes, we'll kick off this list with a boat who the famous SpongeBob character is named after. It would be amazing if you guys could hit up the comments and leave me a ton of SpongeBob memes. That would be awesome. But in real life, the Flying Dutchman isn't a ghost, and Davy Jones' locker isn't a locker full of stinky socks. The Flying Dutchman was a real boat, and it was famously captained by Vander Decken. He was trying to sail all the way to the East Indies with his trusty crew. The old school sailor life would have been amazing, except for all the pirates and scurvy and well, they hit a massive storm all the way at the Cape of Good Hope, and even though Vander Decken had one of the finest crew around, they were not able to make it through the storm. Now it's said that the ghost crew and the ship are cursed to sail the waters for the rest of time, and hundreds of fishermen have said that they have spotted the ship floating around the ocean fog. At number 9, we have Governor Parr. Alright, for this one we have something that is a little less exciting than a boat that is directly connected to one of the greatest cartoons of all time, but Governor Parr has its own charm. The ship was thrown together in 1918 and the world was never sweet to it. It was constantly under repairs, and in 1923 the ship was hit by such a large storm that it was nearly ripped apart and it was left unusable, and the captain was This left the crew stuck on board with a boat with no way to get around, but luckily they were found. The Governor Parr was attached to a rescue vessel and they started to tow it, but not long after that the tow line was broken and the ship was lost forever. No one knows where the boat drifted off to, but some people think that the ghost captain is still on board, refusing to leave the ocean. But realistically it probably sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. At number 8 we have the MV Joyita. What makes a ghost boat a ghost boat? Does it have to go missing from all of humanity, only to ever be seen in the ocean fog? Or could it be a boat where all the crew went missing out of nowhere? Well, if you're unsure, then you need to look in here. Look in your heart. It'll tell you what a real ghost boat is. And I think this one makes the cut. The MV Joyita was found in 1955 with no crew and very little clues as to where everyone went. The dinghies and the logbook were all missing, so there's a chance that the crew took off, but what makes this one so strange is that the people on board didn't need to bail on the Joyita. The boat was lined with cork and had fuel containers on it. All these extremely buoyant items made the ship pretty much unsinkable, so why did the crew abandon ship, and what happened to them? There were also some blood-covered rags on board, meaning they could have been attacked by pirates or injured in a storm. But still, nobody knows. At number 7 we have Zabrina. This is such a beautiful name for a ghost boat now, isn't it? If I was getting on a boat named the Zabrina, the last thing I would expect is all the people on board to die and there to be zero explanation as to why. Well, I guess names can be deceiving because this cute little boat was a transport vessel for nearly over 40 years. She was built in 1873 and in 1917 she set sail through the south of France, probably to transport a bunch of croissants or something. Maybe not. I couldn't imagine a worse way to transport soft, flaky bread than a boat that was built in 1873. You couldn't deliver it. By the time it got there, you would just have a bunch of piles of slop and then some butter-soaked tears running down your face. Well, for whatever reason, the Zabrina was found floating around in the south of France with no crew, no captain, and no explanation as to where everyone went. The ship was in pretty good condition, so it didn't make sense that everyone would just get up and go. The theory is that a German U-boat snuck up on them, took the whole crew prisoners, but other people think that the crew is still sailing out there on a ghost boat. Ooh, ghost boats, that's what this whole thing's about. At number 6 we have the Lady Lovabond. This is a dirty story of betrayal, and nothing gets ghosts more worked up than having someone stab them in the back. Well, legend has it that this boat was set to sail in 1748. They were gonna do this as a way to celebrate the captain's upcoming wedding. What a nice celebration it must have been for him. Like, congrats dude, why don't you drive all your friends around a little bit? Nothing like working at your own party. Well, one of the captain's friends was also in love with his wife, and he was super jealous. God damn, this is some good tea. So what did he do? Did he try to steal his friend's lady when they were all out on the water? No. Did he try to poison the captain and throw his body overboard so no one could find out what happened to him? No. He took control of the ship and then sailed it into the Goodwin Sands, killing everyone on board. My god, dude, I think you could have figured out a better way to deal with this. But still, amazing tea. This is very spicy gossip. Now it's said you can still see the boat sailing around the crash site. At number 5 we have the Jianseng. The Jianseng was a giant transport tanker that was discovered off the coast of southwest Queensland. When the ship was boarded, it seemed that whatever group of people that were on the boat left a long time ago. The ship was extremely run down and the engines were shot, but the weirdest thing was that the nameplates and identifiers were removed from the boat. Like, whoever was on this boat or whoever was the cause of why this boat went missing didn't want anyone to find out where this boat was going or why. The only thing the people searching on the ship could find was a ton of rice. This is how they were able to determine that this was a transport vessel. While on board, the search party said they could hear strange voices and there was a constant presence that something was there watching them. No company, no country or person ever came forward to claim this boat. So when it was determined that this boat had no home, it was sent out to the middle of the ocean and then sunk. Damn dude, you didn't even strip it for parts? Just chuck it down to the bottom of the ocean? Seems like a waste. At number 4 we have the Octavius. Good old Otto Octavius trying to take down Spider-Man in pirate form. Actually, if that's a thing, if there's an alternate universe Spider-Man comic where he's a pirate, please hook me up with a link to that in the comments. That sounds like the perfect combination of dumb and cool that always makes my brain happy. Well, unfortunately, this story has nothing to do with Spider-Man. This boat was found off the coast of Greenland in 1775. It was just drifting along because the entire crew had froze to death. The whole boat was just packed full of icy zombies frozen in place. Well, don't get the wrong impression, they weren't like real zombies like walking around. They were just frozen to death, so they looked all creepy like zombie. You guys get it, you understand. One of the creepiest things about this is the captain. He froze to death at his desk trying to fill out a captain's log from 1762. That means this frozen pack of Jack Sparrows have been floating around on the water for over a decade. At number 3 we have Carol A. Deering. I wonder who gets the job of naming all these boats because some of them are so dope, but this one stinks. Carol A. Deering? She sounds like she has a pencil case collection and complains about how Pepper has a lot of kick to it. Well, this poorly named boat was transporting coal from Virginia to Brazil. It was a good old working boat. It made the trip there alright, but something happened on the way back. The boat disappeared and then was found abandoned off the coast of North Carolina. The lifeboats were gone as well as the crew's belongings, but there was never an explanation as to what happened. Everyone on board was gone. It could have been a mutiny, but we really don't know. At number 2 we have the Caleuche. Here's a well-named boat, guys. Caleuche sounds like a dance you do to win the heart of your soulmate while simultaneously slapping a man to death. Well, this boat is part of the Aboriginal Chilean mythology. It said that every night this boat would form off the coast, and apparently the boat is one massive party. It carries the souls of all the people who drowned at sea. That would be a great time. Everyone's dead and heading to heaven. It's like when you get super drunk on the plane heading to your vacation. Vacation starts early, baby. And at number 1 we have Mary Celeste. Alright, now we have la creme de la creme of ghost ships. It's of course the Mary Celeste. This boat is one of the most famous stories of ghost ships floating around anywhere. It was 1872 when the Mary Celeste was supposed to make the trip from New York to Genoa. She was carrying a ton of booze. It was around 1,500 barrels of booze. Enough to give every frat house in America alcohol poisoning. But Sweet Mary never made it to where she was going. She was spotted off the coast of Portugal. A ship went out to investigate, and much to their surprise, there wasn't a single soul on the boat. The lifeboats were gone, but the ship was completely intact. Nothing was wrong with it, along with all the booze. Every bit of booze was there too. So where did everyone go? Well, no one knows, and that's why it's number 1 on this list.
Things are about to get rocky. In at number 10. It's videos like this that makes us appreciate how big the world actually is. This fishing boat looks like it doesn't stand a chance against these monster waves. It almost looks like everything is going in slow motion, and I couldn't imagine being on this ship and having to go through the storm. Fishermen and sailors are incredibly brave, and after looking at all of these clips, I really have to give them a lot of credit. They are constantly putting their lives on the line every day. I guess you can never really prepare yourself for this kind of storm, but hopefully all of the people on board manage to survive. Up next, number 9, we have this brave little ship. Okay, did you guys just see the ship just cut through the waves? It's a miracle that the ship wasn't eaten by these massive waves. Okay, this captain must be really experienced with big storms, like he does this like every weekend or something. Do you guys think that these sailors can actually get used to these kind of conditions? I swear I would have a heart attack every single time there was like thunder out there. I'd be freaking out. And I'd be holding on for dear life, hoping for the best, expecting the worst. And how much do these people get paid? I'm pretty sure they should send their bosses this video and ask them, you know, boss, check this out, $5 raise please. A cruise ship crashes into number 8. Going on a cruise would be fun, they said. Well, not for these unfortunate souls. I feel like all of the furniture should be bolted down on the cruise ship. People on board must have felt like they were on a roller coaster that would never end. This is not my idea of a calm and relaxing vacation. As soon as the cruise ship docked, I would have taken all my stuff and drive to the nearest airport and book my flight back home. There is no way I would be going back on that thing. I thought that we'd have good technology and radar systems, so shouldn't we be able to predict a little bit when you're going through, you know, a bad storm? I guess the Titanic isn't the only cruise ship that is at the bottom of the Atlantic. Our cargo ship lands in at number 7. Okay, take a deep breath and take a look at this next clip. Okay, damn, Mother Nature, you're so scary. And guys, keep in mind that this is only number 7. Things are about to get way more intense here. I feel like I'm drowning when I'm watching these clips, but for some odd reason, I just can't stop watching them, and for some odd reason, you guys are watching it as well. And how the heck did these people use to navigate the oceans in little wooden sailboats, back in the day? It actually blows my mind when you think about it. Is this what the Bermuda Triangle looks like 24/7? And I guess I'll never find out because, yeah, you won't see me cruising around there anytime soon. A flying ship breaks onto our list at number 6. This is exactly why I'm a lover of land. Don't get me wrong, I love the water too, but I'd rather be high and dry on land than take my chances in rough waters like this. Well, this clip almost seems fake, but trust me guys, it's 100% real. At least, I think it is. I really hope people were able to survive, but honestly, I wouldn't really count on it. I mean, this boat went flying. It's almost like someone asked the captain, hey, did you check the weather today? And he's like, nah, mate, we're fine. Well, I've been whitewater rafting, and I felt like I almost died, and those waves were absolutely nothing in comparison to what we just witnessed. I'm pretty sure this ship got wrecked, and it just goes to show you that nothing is stronger than Mother Nature. A small boat flips over, and at number 5, okay, what the hell did we just watch? Why is this tiny boat out there in this massive storm? And why are you so close to rocks? But more importantly, why is this being filmed? If I had a miniature boat, my first gut instinct would be not to go to the ocean during a storm or a windy day. I would probably take my boat into like a swimming pool or something that is pretty safe. Well, that boat looks like it belongs in a little man-made lake or bathtub even. It literally has no business out there in the ocean. It makes you wonder, how do most people get their boating license? Because clearly lots of people need to be trained, and this is exactly why I don't really like to go on boats or ships. I don't really want to be fish bait or, shark bait. In order to be a good sailor, you have to respect the power of the ocean, because if you don't, it will literally swallow you whole. And now number 4, we have a naval ship being attacked by monster waves. Take a look at this. Did I really hear people laughing? Okay, I personally don't find it funny when my life is in danger, so I definitely wouldn't be laughing in this situation. I would be panicking. I would try to help if I was able to, or I'd probably be bawling in a corner, just crying in like my life jacket. Well, if I'm gonna be really honest for you guys, I'd be the guy puking in a bucket because I get seasick like pretty easily, so I wouldn't really be much help in this situation. Next up, number 3, we have a really intense wave swallowing up a ship. Okay, wait a second. Are these people doing this for fun? Who would willingly go surfing or get into a boat that can easily capsize? I'm pretty sure that all the people on board were washed away, and I'm pretty positive that none of them survived. And I'm really concerned about the people on shore. Why are they filming this tragedy and not using their cell phones, to not video, close up the app, call 911? People were legit cheering in the clip, and this honestly makes me really concerned about humanity. I mean, I do question humanity quite often these days, and I'm no expert or anything, but by judging that current and the strength of the waves, I don't think those people are gonna have the ability to swim back to shore. This video makes me want to stay dry on land forever. A cruise ship gets smashed by a 100-foot wave, that's like this big. That's huge. And this brings us to number 2. If you guys love to go on cruises, you might want to reconsider your next vacation, because something tells me that this next clip will make you want to stay on dry land. Okay, note to self. Do not go on a cruise ship during a hurricane season unless I want to feel like a fish in a blender. I hope people on this ship were able to make it out of the storm in one piece. I'd go straight to my room and hang on for dear life. But if you thought that first clip was bad, well, take a look at what happens next. Is that guy okay though? It looks like he is having way too much fun. I'm pretty sure he's never heard of the Titanic because I don't think that he knows cruise ships can sink. I mean, put your phone down, put a life jacket, buckle it up because it doesn't seem like those waves are gonna give you any mercy. Topping this list in at number 1, and thank you guys so much for staying tuned to the end of this video, you guys are awesome. Well, we have a modern cruise ship that actually sunk. Okay, in all seriousness though, something like this should never happen. But thankfully this story has a happy ending because all 571 passengers were rescued long before the ship actually went down. I just hope that this cruise ship liner had really good insurance because I'm sure all the passengers got together for a class action lawsuit, and I'm guessing that ship cost them millions if not billions of dollars. I mean, I'm no expert in the cost of ships.